let's talk about something kind of gross and kind of freaky. Things that can control your mind. Well, not you specifically, but we'll talk about that. So, there are a few different parasites where, in part of their life cycle, they can actually control the mind. Mind is a relative term of the host that they're in. So, this is probably the most well known mind control parasite, the cordyceps fungus. It is what the fungus in The Last of Us was based off of, and it's pretty freaky. So, what it does, it infects the host being arthropods like grasshoppers, crickets, ants are a pretty common one, and it makes them it just gets into their system, gets into their brain, makes them climb up super tall, where then they stay, the fungus grows out, and then releases all of their fungal spores to go infect more bugs. Then rinse and repeat. Another kind of relatively well-known one, if only for looking very creepy and a lot of people on TikTok being like, bro, what the fuck, are the horsehair worms. So horsehair worms are nematoids, so different than nematodes, the roundworms, but they are parasites and they infect, again, arthropods. So I think this one's a grasshopper, but commonly crickets and centipedes and pretty much most types of terrestrial arthropods. They infect them and they just grow inside the body of their host, and then when they're fully grown, they cause the arthropod to go seek water and then drown themselves. So the infected, for example, cricket, once the worms are fully grown, they will hop their merry little way over to a body of water, like a pool or a creek or a pond or something, and jump in, stay there till they drown, at which point the worms will eject out of the cricket, at which point the cricket's basically dead anyway because there's no room for organs anymore because it's all worm. So the worms eject, they go live their lives in the water, lay eggs, at which point rinse and repeat. So this is the myrmidid worms. They are a different group of parasitic worms. They often get confused with the horsehair worms because they are morphologically and behaviorally very, very similar. Like, I learned about these in my invertebrate zoology class, and some of the only differences were on, like, the molecular and genetic level. So they're essentially the same thing. The other kind of difference is that these guys mainly only infect spiders instead of, like, all terrestrial arthropods. They are mainly in spiders and other arachnids, but again, they cause very, very similar behavior. They're basically the same thing, just genetically different. Finally, we have the lancet liver fluke, a very interesting endoparasite, mind control parasite that I haven't seen very many people talk about. So these guys, actually, their main hosts are like large grazing animals like cattle and deer in that, but they don't actually do the mind control on those large animals. So kind of the basic life cycle, they start out as eggs. The eggs get into the large grazing mammal, they have their whole life cycle, they grow into adults, and then they exit through the feces of those large animals. Then what happens, there are eggs in those feces, and so those get eaten, taken up by something like an ant, or a different arthropod. Those eggs hatch into the baby flukes, and then the flukes take over the ant's body and control them to make them climb up as high as they can onto a long blade of grass or flower or something, and then just stay there until a large grazing animal like a cow comes along and eats the grass that the ant is mind-controlled stuck onto, and that restarts the whole life cycle because now there are flukes inside the cow again. So that's particularly interesting because the main host is not the one being mind controlled. It is just a intermediate ant or other bug host that is being mind controlled by these guys. Overall, pretty interesting stuff. Fortunately, mind control parasites seem to be only in arthropods right now. Very fortunate because we don't want those.